Hello, Ms. Buckner and Ms. Jones. My name is Elliot Yu. I am 15 years old and currently in the 10th grade at Da Vinci Design, and this is my presentation of learning for English 10 and Modern World History. First is English with my character analysis. The character I chose was Captain Beatty. Captain Beatty is a character who is constantly contradicting himself. He's a paradox. What I mean by this is he is the captain of the firemen. He's been entrusted with power over a group of people whose job it is to burn books, yet as a character in the story, he is someone who knows the most about books. My first evidence from Fahrenheit 451 is from the scene where Montag and his group is burning the books in a woman's house. Beatty says, "You've been locked up here for years with the regular damn Tower of Babel." This is one of many biblical references he makes, and this is before we even found out he's read books. This is one of the references he makes out of the books, poems, and plays that he's been given power to burn. The second evidence piece or citation I have is from the scene in part 1 where Beatty is giving his big speech to Montag about why books are bad and why he should continue being a fireman. Captain Beatty says, "Every fireman sooner or later hits this." This is basically him admitting that Montag's not the only one, and that he himself has at some point read books. But unlike Montag, he did not continue to pursue this love, because unlike Montag, he did not want the free will and thinking that the books provided people with. And my third and last excerpt is from one of the last times we hear from Captain Beatty. This is one of the last things he says to Montag, and it's, "Why don't you belt Shakespeare at me, you fumbling snob? There's no terror Cassius in your threats, for I'm armed so strong in honesty, that they pass by me in idle wind, which I respect not." In this scene, this is Captain Beatty's last way of convincing Montag to come back to being a fireman and to forget the whole books nonsense. His last way of convincing Montag that books are bad is a direct quote from Shakespeare. And that's something I found interesting, and that's why I chose the character, because upon first reading his name, I did not think he would be an important character, but it wasn't until the scene in part 1 and his big speech to Montag that we first got to see into his mind and how he thought about the whole books thing, and I thought that was strange. And that ends my characterization in English, and I'll be moving on to history. The essential skill I chose for history was essential skill number 4, imperialism. Imperialism is the act of a stronger nation taking over a weaker nation and taking over everything about their politics and how the government works. There were 5 main causes of imperialism: political, religious, economic, ideological, and exploratory. Political means politics, it's nationalism. It was the idea that the more countries you controlled, the more power you had, and the more power you had, the more pride people could have in their own country. My evidence for this is my notes on the Monroe Doctrine and Latin America. Both of these talked about America and their empire, and the Monroe Doctrine was basically it was a document that gave America power and control over the Western Hemisphere and their empire. Second is religious, and for religious I have my notes from the imperialism in China. For religion, people wanted to spread their religion around the world, even though it wasn't always well received, much like what happened in China. In China, there was this thing called the Boxer Rebellion, and it was basically Chinese people fighting against Christian missionaries who wanted to get rid of their culture. The third cause is economic. My notes are from imperialism in China, Africa, and India, which, as you can see, these countries that were doing the imperializing were all countries that had already been industrialized. And these industrialized countries were looking for new resources, labor, and land to replace what they had already used during their industrialization. All of these, from imperialism in China, Africa, and India, all share this one economic factor that's repeated through most imperializations. For ideological is social Darwinism, or white man's burden. Well, that deals more with religion. It was the idea that white was right, and that these countries who were European, or for a majority white, were more civil, knowledgeable, or more capable of controlling these darker countries just because of the color of their skin. And that's something that is common today, even though it is generally frowned upon to be racist nowadays. It is something that had been such a constant throughout the years that we still have to deal with it today. And these are my notes from Introduction to Imperialism, and also Imperialism in India. And for the last cause of imperialism, it was exploratory. These European countries were coming to new and foreign places, and they were absolutely fascinated by these undiscovered lands. So they had gone out and they had mapped out and they had rediscovered all these places that they had never been before. And that ends my pre-written presentation part and my history part. Thank you for listening, and now I'll be moving on to my grammar tree and my DBQ defense. This is my grammar tree. The sentence I had is, the puppy pulled up the slippers from under the bed and shredded all the toilet paper. The is an adjective, puppy is a noun, pulled is a verb, all is an adverb, the is an adjective, slippers are a noun, from is a preposition, and under is a preposition as well. The is an adjective, bed is a noun, and I have a comma there separating, but as Chris said earlier, that comma is not supposed to be there, so we're just going to ignore that. And is a conjunction, shredded is a verb, all is an adverb, the is an adjective, toilet is an adjective, and paper is a noun. And the subsections I put them in for phrases was, the puppy is a noun phrase, pulled is the verb phrase, all the slippers is a noun phrase, from under is a prepositional phrase, the bed is a noun phrase, and C isn't in a phrase, it just kind of carries down because it's a conjunction. Shredded all is a verb phrase, and the toilet paper is an adjective phrase. And these phrases go into bigger subsections, which is all from the puppy pulled all the slippers from under the bed is an independent clause, and shredded all the toilet paper is a dependent clause. Both of those added together equals a sentence.
All right, let's build on what we already know. Yes, let's go to the phrases. So you say the puppy is a noun phrase, therefore it's the subject. And then you said pulled is the verb phrase. And we can build onto that because we can also define what was pulled or how it was pulled. So what else, or what other phrases do we add to that verb phrase to make it a more complete independent verb phrase?
The second noun phrase?
The second noun phrase, yeah. And why?
Because pulled relates to the slippers. You want me to write that?
And why do we not put the comma there?
Because the and is already separating the independent clause and the dependent clause.
Why did you say all was an adverb?
Because it was limiting or describing how much of something.
So if we're talking about how much, or quantity, or quality, what part of speech are we doing?
Adjective.
Adjectives. Good. Go on to
The question for my DBQ was, how does Montesquieu's view different from a government system based on an absolute monarchy? My thesis statement is Montesquieu's idea of how a government should function is different from a government system based on an absolute monarchy, because Montesquieu believes that giving all the power to one person will result in a tyrant. My evidence for this is, in the document above, Montesquieu states, there can be no liberty where the executive, legislative, and judicial powers are united in one person or body of persons. And my explanation for this, or my analysis, is Montesquieu is saying you cannot trust just one person's opinion when ruling a government, for that one person could be corrupt and then the whole system would fail.
Based on this and Montesquieu's kind of idea of having executive, legislative, and judicial powers, do you think he thought that those might be corrupted?
Yes, because he wanted to split this one power into 3 subsections so they could all check up on each other.
And I have a couple questions going back to your presentation on imperialism. Can you give me a specific example of when Europeans use political motive?
They use political motive, or England used political motive in India, where they completely controlled the government and completely controlled India. Instead of just making it a colony, they made it part of the British Empire and ruled over it.
And can you give me an example of economic motive?
Economic motive could also be India, because the British Empire considered them a jewel in the crown because they had the most natural resources and they had the most raw materials that they could use. So economic-wise, they had the most resources that England could take from.
Okay. Why else was England interested in India besides the abundant natural resources?
Trading, I think.
And then what else did they have a lot of?
Land. Or they had a lot of people that they could be used for military-wise.
Okay. And then what else did they do with those people?
It could make them work, and they could sell stuff back to them.
Thank you.
In your presentation of the character analysis of Beatty, you said one of the references he uses was the Tower of Babel, and it alludes to a biblical reference. Can you go into more detail as to why this adds to Beatty as a paradox?
Because as a character who is given, when we first hear about him, he's the captain, and in the scene in part 1 where he's giving his speech, it's his job to make sure Montag doesn't want an interest in books. Yet as he is telling him not to use books, everything he says is constantly littered with references to the books he's not supposed to be reading.
Do you know what the Tower of Babel alludes to?
No, I don't.